I'm going to start out my masterclass, my clinic, with a video. Now, what I want you to do is I want you to put on your critical listening ears and put in those critical visual eyes, because I'm going to play two different videos. Now, these videos are going to be of two great Hall of Fame drummers playing the exact same arrangements. But they're going to approach these arrangements very, very differently. And what I want to do is we're not going to watch the whole arrangement. We'll watch maybe a minute, minute and a half of it. We're going to discuss what did you see and hear differently between the approaches, okay? So here is video number one. Okay, I think we got enough of that. Now let's watch, by the way, for bonus points, anyone know what that arrangement is? That's an old Count Basie standard called 1 o'clock jump. So now let's watch this.
Preparing for this event, I hadn't really studied anybody else's drumming that closely for many years.
Okay, I think we heard enough to be able to discern some differences. Anybody want to be brave and tell me what they heard that might be different between those two?
Buddy Rich, he had a bit more dynamics, I could tell. He was playing a bit all the comping and stuff.
Uh-huh.
Neil, it felt kind of like, since he's primarily a rock drummer,
Yeah.
he's kind of emphasizing them a bit more.
Anybody hear that? He was saying that by the way, the two drummers that we're talking about here, that first clip was Buddy Rich, and the second clip was Neil Peart. Okay? And the comment was that when Buddy, in the first example, was playing, in particular, the comping ideas were a little lighter, right? They had a little bit more bounce to it, right? Whereas when we heard Neil's comping ideas were maybe, well, I like to say maybe a little heavier, right? A little more downbeat based. Anything else? It's okay. Oh, over here. Hi, Devin. How are you?
Doing well. I noticed that Neil's mechanical approach just has more motion overall. Buddy Rich is very tight movement and use left hand muting on the hat, whereas Neil is right hand swinging, 90-degree
Right. Both of these are going to be very specific things that I'm going to address in a minute. Absolutely. Good observation. Anybody else want to say anything? Okay. So where this is going to lead me now is the topic of this masterclass. And since we are in college, I will go ahead and tell you what we'll put on our mortarboard for a second and tell you that the name of my clinic is Stylistic Authenticity and Dynamic Balance. The slang name is going to be Don't Play Jazz Like a Rock Drummer and Don't Play Rock Like a Jazz Drummer. Okay? Now, it's always important when you're addressing a problem to know why you want to fix it, and you want to know why it's happening, and then you have to figure out how to study it and how to practice it, okay? So there are numerous reasons why rock drummers, when they play jazz, just kind of adopt that same kind of rock mentality, and vice versa. You hear jazz drummers try to play backbeat-oriented music or rock music, and they kind of bring that same jazz approach. But I'm going to give you 3 of the reasons that I encounter in my teaching studio that are primary reasons why. One, some drummers have a lack of basic technique, kind of what Devin was saying, that's appropriate for the style that they're trying to play, okay? And that also blends into the independence aspect of things too. In other words, technique of how the hands and feet work together. A second thing would be a lack of appropriate musical vocabulary, okay? And that's another big thing that you heard there. Neil kind of took what he, kind of like basic rock vocabulary even, and kind of played it into that style. Did you notice he played a lot of heavy bass drum on count 1, right? And that's sort of the death knell for trying to move jazz forward, right? We always try to phrase to the upbeat, except in the case of a ballad, right? So this is one you heard a lot of heavy downbeats. So that was kind of a lack of appropriate vocabulary with that. And then the other thing is that quite often I see in my practice that students will come in and I'll have them play a particular style, rock or jazz. And let's say we take a rock drummer that has limited experience with jazz, and I'll say, let's just play a basic swing groove. I'm not going to tell you what to do, but I'll give you the tempo. And they play, and what they do is they just play like a particular thing, and there's really nothing. They'll play one straight groove all the way through, and the phrasing is strange. Like, let me give you an example. They would play something that might sound like this. Now, technically, that's not incorrect. It's just maybe not musically appropriate, okay? But where I'm going with this is many young drummers, and rightfully so, will get a book and it'll have a groove written out, or like the jazz swing pattern. And where I'm getting with this is that there's only so much that our notation and method books can give us, right? In other words, method books, even at their best, address a particular problem, and the best ones seek to fix that and have been proven to fix it. But you can't notate feel. To some extent, you can only notate dynamics to so much, right? Because, I mean, think of it like this. Dynamics are subjective. Like, here's a really bad example. Mezzo piano to the band Sleep Token is different than the mezzo piano for the Bill Charlap piano trio, right? You know what I mean by that, okay? And then the other thing is just the improvisatory nature of jazz. You can't notate it. So drummers will come in and they will play technically what's written on the page, but that's not always, again, musically appropriate, okay? Now, what I want to do now is I want to first tackle that topic of learning a little bit of jazz vocabulary and technique. And I think one of the best ways to approach this is to go through and describe what each of these instruments are doing, and then I'll give you a few tips as far as like how you can bring a little bit more authenticity and dynamic balance to playing this. Now, I'm going to ask one more question before I do this. Has anybody ever heard someone say to you, hey, drummer, if you can play jazz, you can play anything. It's the most difficult thing to play. You guys heard that before? Well, that's wrong. The one thing that I want everybody to get into your mind, okay? There are no styles that are just intrinsically more difficult than anything else. They're just going to be maybe a little bit more familiar, and the way, or unfamiliar, I should say. And the other way that I like to say is this: playing a jazz beat, ride beat, is just slightly more sophisticated than playing a backbeat 2 and 4 type groove, okay? And another way, if you want to draw a mental picture, think of it like this, okay? A jazz drummer playing in a jazz trio and a rock drummer playing in a heavy metal band have virtually the exact same job. They're just going about it differently. They both have to play good feeling time that has appropriate vocabulary that serves the music. And so the way you should think of it is this, or this is one of the ways I like to think about it. Think of a sundial, okay? Sundial, just a piece of rock with like a piece of metal or maybe another rock that's very, very carefully placed so that when you put that sundial out in the sun, the movement of the sun tells you what time it is, right, during the day. Now, also, picture a Rolex watch, okay? If you've ever taken the back off of a Rolex watch, there are about 50 little gears and pulleys and different types of mechanisms in there. Those two things do the exact same function. It's just the Rolex slightly more sophisticated, okay? Now, if you can keep that in your mind and you can reframe this, you can approach playing jazz with a significantly more, we'll call it open approach, and not be as scared of it, okay? Now, I'm going to go over and I'm going to demonstrate a few aspects of this type of beat, okay? All right. One of the first things that I want to talk about are the cymbals, ride cymbal. For the most part, whenever we're playing a jazz swing beat, the cymbal is going to be, we'll call it your signature sound. And anybody who listens to this style of music knows that great jazz drummers have signature ride cymbal sounds. In other words, there are many times that you can put on a recording, and even if you've never heard it before, but you're familiar with the genre, you can tell who the drummer is by what the ride cymbal sounds like. And a couple of those drummers that just pop off the top of my head: Tony Williams, Elvin Jones, Jack DeJohnette, Billy Higgins, Albert Tootie Heath, Roy Haynes. That's a good place to start. There are more, but those gentlemen have immediately identifiable sounds whenever they play. Most drummers who study this genre also will spend an inordinate amount of time developing their ride cymbal sound. There's an old practice routine that says when you're really developing your cymbal sound, put on a track like just a click or like a bass line for an hour and practice your cymbal. Okay? Now, I want to talk a little bit about some techniques that you can use to develop your cymbal sound, okay? One of the ones that I use when I teach my students to help with their phrasing is use a pendulum motion. Now, you don't have to do this, okay? But what it does is, in particular, it illustrates one way that you can play this cymbal pattern that creates what I would call a common vocabulary, or at least something that sounds like a jazz drummer. And the way that you end up playing this is when you play the ride cymbal, counts 1 and 3 are going to be on what I call the outside portion of the cymbal. 2 and 4 are going to be on the inside portion of the cymbal, and the skip beat will be somewhere in the middle, okay? Now, this does not have to be a huge graphic motion. Sometimes when you see some videos of Elvin Jones and Ed Shaughnessy, they have huge pendulum motions, right? It doesn't have to be that big. This is an example. Notice the motion gets smaller the faster you go. Okay, it has to, right? But what's happening, if you want to break it down in the most intellectual sense of the word, when you pick your stick up to go from count 1 to count 2, it creates what I call a natural phrasing, or perhaps even, let's go so far as to say maybe like a tenuto style of phrasing, where it puts just not an accent. It's not an accent. It just puts a little bit of weight on that note, right? And then the second part that I want to talk about is this. If you recall back to when you saw Neil Peart playing, he did a thing that I see inexperienced jazz drummers do all the time, and that's what I call you over-articulate your pattern, which means that you are playing every single note with a stroke. And notice, again, are the notes correct? Yes, they are correct. But the phrasing doesn't sound very good, and it sounds kind of heavy, right? I have all of my students get to the point to where they're playing 2 motions in a measure of 4/4. The motions start on count 2 and count 4. So I'll start with count 1, but here's the motions. It's 1 motion, 2 motions. 1 motion, 2 motions. So what happens is when I drop that stick on count 2 and count 4, there's enough energy created from that dropping of the stick that all I have to do is redirect that energy to play the end of 2 and the end of 4 and then count 1. I don't have to re-stick it, right? Do a little open-closed motion with my fingers. And then naturally, when you play the up-tempo stuff, it's very graphically done that way, right? In other words, on counts 2 and 4, you're making 1 motion and getting 3 notes. Okay? All right. Now, let's move to the next thing. Let's talk about the hi-hat. The hi-hat is another barrier for a lot of drummers who are not familiar with playing this style. And the reason is because seldom are they accustomed to playing the hi-hat with their foot. Most of the time when they're playing it with their foot, they're playing it with their foot closed so that they can play an 8th note pattern or 16th note pattern with the stick. But in this situation, you're playing, I'll call it a de facto backbeat with your foot on count 2 and 4. And you might think to yourself, well, man, I'm a great double bass drum player, so that should be easy. Not so fast. Not so fast. It's a completely different feel playing the hi-hat than playing the bass drum. A couple of things, just think about this for a minute. Look at the spacing between the cymbals. The travel of that foot pedal is minimal compared to the travel of a second bass drum pedal, right? In other words, if you have the throw of a bass drum pedal this far away from the bass drum head, that's about 4 times longer than what the travel of a hi-hat pattern is, right? Or hi-hat pedal. Secondarily, whenever you play a hi-hat, it's a firm, man, foot down, right? In other words, it's a firm surface that you're landing on. On a bass drum, most of the time that beater ball's coming off, right? Coming off the head. It's a completely different feel, okay? Now, a couple of other things that I want to bring to your attention. If the keen eye saw what Neil Peart was doing in that video, could you tell that his top cymbal was tight? I mean, that thing was like a brick, okay? You don't want to do that. You want to have that cymbal moving a little bit for one, and I'm going to give one more huge thing that he did in just a second. But you want to have a little bit of play on that top cymbal. You want these cymbals to be able to sizzle a little bit, okay? Secondarily, also, when you play that open-close motion with your foot, to get the best sound, your cymbals are not going to just completely and totally vertically close on one another perfectly like that. You want them to actually, if you did the super slow motion camera, you want them to kind of roll close like that, okay? Because what happens is it pushes the air out of between those cymbals and it gives you a firmer chick sound, okay? Now, the other big thing, did you notice that in the intro of 1 O'Clock Jump, Neil played the hi-hat pattern like this? Did you notice Buddy played it like this? Huge difference. Did you notice this one? It's real kind of herky-jerky and choppy, right? There's nothing smooth about it at all. There's no continuum, really. Every time he closes it hard with the foot, it kind of abruptly stops the momentum, right? When you play this, and notice what I'm doing is I'm putting just a little bit of space between these two cymbals, maybe 1/8 of an inch. And I'm not closing it with my foot. I'm using my hand. Significantly better, smoother sound, okay? And then when Buddy wanted to comp, he basically took his hand away and played that, okay? All right, so now we put these two things together really quickly. Here's what we have. Okay? Now, let's go to the bane of my existence when teaching this. The bass drum. Okay? Some students come in and they think, well, there's nothing happening on the bass drum, so I'm just going to play, you know. Nope, not so fast. When we're playing in a very traditional fashion, there's a style of bass drum called feathering. And feathering is essentially a very light quarter note, four beat to the bar pattern that's played to accompany your jazz swing beat, okay? Now, what it's going to sound like without anything else being played is this. Can everybody, it might be hard, I'm not sure if you can see my foot, but if you can see that beater ball, it's only moving maybe 1 inch, 1.5 inches from that batter head, okay? And most people would also say, yeah, right, okay, nobody's ever going to hear that. Well, here's what I will say. They're not supposed to hear it. It should be felt. It should be felt more than heard. And here's a demonstration of this, okay? I'm going to play just a moment of time with cymbal, hi-hat. I'm not going to play any left hand. Cymbal, hi-hat, and feathering on the bass drum. I'm going to drop that feathering out from time to time and see if you can tell when it's being dropped out, okay? Could you tell the difference? It's unbelievably powerful, isn't it? And you will really notice that if you're in a performance situation. If you're playing it and you drop it out, anybody who's listening in the band is probably going to turn around to you like, the whole bottom of the drum set fell out. It's very subtle, isn't it? Okay? Now, how do you practice this? Okay? I got to stand up to show you this. About 25 years ago, I was playing a jazz festival, and I was honored to play on the same stage as just some incredible jazz musicians. One of my favorite jazz drummers of all time, who also has a signature ride sound, is Kenny Washington. And Kenny Washington does a lot of teaching up in New York. And we were just sitting in a tent backstage, and we were talking about stuff, and he was talking about his students. And I was like, so Kenny, how do you teach feathering? And this is what he did. He goes, if anybody has ever met Kenny, he goes, oh, Cat, you just show them how to tap your toe. And that's it. That is it. This is the motion that you make. I generally play heel down whenever I'm playing this, okay? And it's a very subtle motion. Toes very close to the strap of the chain and that tap of the toe. Now, that's not to say that you can't play it heel up. Jacob, you play heel up, don't you? Oh, you do heel down? I've had some students that can just rip feathering heel up. So I'm not going to change that. But if you're starting out from the ground floor, I prefer heel down whenever you do this. So really subtle motion, okay? So now, again, the last thing I'll say is most of the time when you're playing jazz, you're going to be playing on a smaller drum set. You can tell this is an 18-inch bass drum, and it's tuned wide open. The only thing that's on there's a felt strip, okay? But you want to release that beater ball from the head also. Not that. Hear that? This. Okay? So make sure when you're tapping your toe, make sure that beater ball comes off of the head. Okay? All right. Snare drum now. Okay? Now, this is where you're chiefly going to start your improvisation. Okay? Now, granted, once this whole thing gets going, it's free game. Everything's improvised. Cymbal pattern, hi-hat, bass drum, you name it, right? Okay? But you have to build some sort of vocabulary. And the only way that I know how to build effective vocabulary is you have to listen to a lot of music. Okay? You can get method books. I mean, we use method books all the time. We use the Chapin book. We use syncopation. We use the Riley books. All of those, fantastic. They are standard definitive methods. But, okay, everybody's going to laugh when I do this. Do you play gigs like this? What did I just play? Syncopation, right. Those are, again, those linear books are brilliant. You are only limited to what you can do with those, with what your mind can think of, right? But you're not going to go on a gig and play that, right? That's for independence and reading exercises and a few other things, right? You have to listen, okay? You can get a few jump-off points to play with that, but, I mean, you have to listen to music to build some vocabulary, okay? The only other thing that I'd say about the snare drum, is when you are playing comping ideas, play real rhythmic ideas. Don't just play chatter, okay? And what I mean by that is you get your time going, and it's feeling good. You don't just want to play mind of... That really doesn't mean anything, right? Play some rhythmic ideas. Get your ideas, of course, from vocabulary of listening to records and also by what's happening in the ensemble around you. A great place to listen in particular are other chordal instruments because they're comping as well. Listen to what the piano player is doing. Listen to what a guitarist is doing. If you've got a vibe player, listen to that, right? Get some ideas about how they're comping their chords. Okay? All right, let me see if there's anything else I want to add. By the way, any questions about anything so far? Because if you guys have questions, I want you to ask them as we go along. I don't want you to, forget things. Okay? Oh, hang on one second. Let me was that Brian Tate back there? Yes.
Not so much a question, but a comment to add to the
No, go ahead. Yeah.
of that feathering of the bass drum is to help marry the sort of
Right. Well, it adds percussive attack also to the acoustic bass as well. It adds a little foundation, warmth, and percussive attack. Absolutely. Devin, what were you going to say?
I was going to ask about you said tapping the toe for the right foot.
Mm-hmm.
On the left foot, do you typically like do a toe down?
Yeah,
Switch it up?
I completely hair lip the Pope on that. And, yeah, okay, and what I mean is like, most teachers will sit here and tell you, if you play heel down on the bass drum, play heel down on the hi-hat. Play heel up on the bass drum, play heel up on the hi-hat, because it creates balance issues, right? Because one of the things you always have to fight also when you're a drummer, when you're getting your setup together, you have to figure out how you're going to sit, how high you're going to sit, how far you're going to sit, where your pedal's going to go, because you are balanced. You are a tripod when you're sitting behind the drums, right? And think of it this way, okay? Which is a more stable tripod? One that looks like that or one that looks like that? It's going to be the second one, right? So that's my little diatribe about not sitting too close to the drums, right? But to your point, I do something a little bit unorthodox, which is also that Kenny Washington, by the way, does the exact same thing. I play heel up on the hi-hat and heel down on the bass drum. Again, there's not really a right or wrong. That's just, I learned that way, and that was just a personal choice. I felt like I got a stronger hi-hat. Okay? All right, I got to get going here. We got to bring somebody up. I don't know if you know who this guy is, but we could bring somebody up in about 20 minutes. Okay, now, I'm going to play something for you now. This is just an audio clip. We're going to turn the tables now. Okay? We're going to talk about rock drummers playing like rock drummers and jazz drummers trying to play rock. Let's see what happens. See if you've ever heard this one before. I'm going to move forward just a little bit on this.
Goes on.
Drums keep pounding a rhythm to the brain. La-da-da-da-dee, la-da-da-da-da.
The grocery store, the supermarket.
Little girls still break their hearts,
And men still keep on marching off to war.
Electrically they keep a baseball score.
Okay.
And the beat goes.
Now, let's listen to the exact same song, but played differently.
Da-da-da-da-da. Charleston was once the rage, History has banned that stage, The mini skirts, the current thing, Teeny bopper is our newborn king, And the beat goes on. The beat goes on. Drums keep pounding.
Okay. The exact same song, but approached vastly differently. Now, I will say this, okay? When that record came out, the original, that would have been mid-'60s, late '60s, something like that. That arrangement that you just heard, that was Buddy Rich again, by the way, that second version of The Beat Goes On that was written by Sonny Bono. And that was Buddy Rich's young daughter, Kathy, that was singing at that time as well. Something that was also happening at that time, there were a lot of, we'd call it straight-ahead jazz musicians that were starting to kind of dip their toe into rock a little bit. And that had more of a groove that was akin to an old Lee Morgan tune called the Sidewinder. So it wasn't necessarily big backbeat-oriented, but you can hear the difference, right? There's a big difference between the way the drummer on the Sonny and Cher version approached that backbeat-oriented groove as opposed to Buddy Rich. Now, when we talk about like dynamic hierarchy as far as like what are the loud instruments and soft instruments, when we were over here on drum set, we had cymbal, hi-hat, and snare drum all basically about the same volume, right? With the bass drum, when feathering, significantly lower, okay? It's very different when you're playing backbeat-oriented music. Your volume hierarchy is basically going to be this. Snare drum on the top, bass drum right next to it, and then right hand either playing hi-hat or ride cymbal below, okay? Now, there are some exceptions, okay? So, for example, if a traditional just backbeat-oriented groove, if I'm going to use that dynamic, would be something similar to this, like if you needed to play something Van Halen-ish that was rocking and it had either like a washy cymbal or hi-hat, you still can't let that right hand overpower what's happening down here. So that still has to be present. And just as you guys are sitting there thinking to yourself, oh, well, that young kid, that never happens. They're animals when they play. I cannot begin to tell you how many times I'm either in a lesson or in here, and this is what I hear. Hey, this happens regularly, okay? Now, I want you to think about this. If you get down to brass tacks, what my job is to train young musicians to make a living, okay? That's brass tacks, that's what it is. When you leave here, you need to be able to be equipped to go out and play stylistically authentic material, right? It is unbelievably important for your ability to play these styles authentically so that you can get hired when you're out here. And another secondary aspect to this is that when you are playing in a situation where you are mic'd, whether it's live or in the studio, the microphones are hearing you before anyone else. And if you don't give a sound person the appropriate dynamic levels, there's no way they're going to be able to make you sound good, okay? So you have to give them stylistically appropriate sounds or you're lost. There's just nothing you can do about it, okay? Now, let's do the same thing over here that we did over there. Let's go over to the sundial where we've left the Rolex, right? Okay? Now, you know how we talked about jazz drummers have like signature ride sounds? A lot of the best backbeat drummers have signature snare drum sounds. Think about John Bonham. Think about Al Jackson Jr., Alex Van Halen, Stuart Copeland, Steve Jordan, Chad Sexton, some dude named Kenny Aronoff. Signature snare drum sounds, right? Those players develop that snare drum sound in the same way that jazz drummers develop a cymbal sound. So how do you go about doing that? I tell every one of my students that if you're going to be playing backbeat-oriented music, you absolutely positively need to be able to develop rim shots for your backbeat. What's a rim shot? That's where you strike the rim and the snare head simultaneously, okay? What does it do? It does several things. One, it gives that snare drum backbeat more percussive attack. The second thing that it does is it slightly raises the pitch of the drum. Third thing, it gives you a little bit more presence. Fourth thing, volume. Big difference between this and I didn't really hit it any differently, right? Except those last 3 or 4 notes that I played were rim shots, okay? Now, how do you practice that? You sit in a practice room, put on a metronome, and do nothing but rim shots. I wish I could tell you there was a magic bullet. There's not. Once you get your drum configured, you sit down and practice it. When you first start doing this, you're going to feel like a beginner. But everybody has to go through that. Everybody does. Everybody does. Okay? So you have to sit down and just practice your rim shots. A couple of other things that give you that signature snare drum sound. Did you notice when I was playing, I wasn't stabbing at the drum? Did you notice that I make motion between the notes? When you play an acoustic instrument and you have to strike it, however you move is how you are going to sound. Okay? Did you notice that when we were talking about the ride cymbal stuff and the hi-hat stuff, we were talking about if you over-articulate those notes, it's going to sound stiff, right? That's because they're moving in that way. If you move in round fluid motions, you get round fluid sounds. If you move in short stabbing motions, you get short stabbing sounds. So when you play those backbeats, create some motion in between those backbeats. It works as a timing mechanism and it works for consistency. Okay? All tempos. Your motions get smaller the faster you go, just like we talked about when playing the ride pattern over there. Okay? There's a bunch of different ways that you can play that rim shot that'll give you a different sound. For those of you who love 311, Chad Sexton, great drummer, he plays rim shots and only about this much of his stick extends onto the head. And what I mean by that is he doesn't even come close to playing dead center. He gets that ringy sound, right? The closer you get to the center of the drum, the drier it gets, right? Or the more staccato it gets. In the center of every drum, that's where we have what we call the nodal point, or the dead spot, right? For those of you who play percussive keyboards, percussion like marimba, vibes, you know that where the rope runs through, where the bar is mounted to the frame, that's the nodal point. If you hit it, it's a dead spot, right? So the center of the drum's a dead spot. So if you want to get a more percussive, drier sound, aim for the middle. If you want to get the fullest sound possible, aim for the beat of your stick to be slightly past center, okay? All of that, subtle differences, but it adds up when you're dealing with dynamic balance, okay? Same thing like we talked about over here with the bass drum. Play to the drum and release. Not through the drum, to the drum. Through the drum, you're going to be some orthopedic surgeon's best friend, right? Play to the drum, not through the drum, right? Okay? All right. Notice, this is not the bass drum over here. This is the kick drum now, because we're going to kick it, okay? In a 180-degree difference over here on the jazz kit, we've talked about how that, when you're feathering, is going to be the softest voice on the drum set for basic playing. Over here, this is going to be very close to, if not the same as the snare drum. So you want to play with some oomph. Now notice on this drum also, it's dampened, right? In other words, there's dampening inside. The chief reason for that is we want percussive attack, okay? Now, Bonham, for those of you, one of the greatest drummers ever in history, played a wide open bass drum. There's always exceptions to the rule, but most of the time, when you're playing backbeat-oriented music, you will want more percussive attack than resonance. That being said, it's significantly more acceptable to leave that bass drum beater in the head if it's a musical choice that you're consciously making, okay? So think about beater ball coming off the head. You're going to get a little rounder, more resonant sound. Beater ball in the head and staying in the head, more percussive attack, drier sound. Again, I mostly play heel up when I'm doing backbeat-oriented music and playing the bass drum. Heel up does not mean your heel stays up all of the time, okay? When I'm playing a ballad, say 60 beats per minute, if I'm playing just the bass drum on 1 and 3, my heel will rest between those notes. So heel up does not always mean that your heel is staying up. It just means that your heel comes up to generate the stroke, okay? But if you're playing something faster, like a fast 4 to the bar type thing, notes are so close together at that time that there's enough tension and release during those notes that your heel can stay up the whole time. Okay? So, what do we have for balance so far? We've got big bass drum or kick drum, snare drum. Okay? Now, let's go to the right hand. Right hand on hi-hat or right hand on cymbal. In most traditional playing, this is going to be your accompaniment hand or your accompaniment voice. And I like to think of it as sort of the glue that holds together your bass drum and snare drum pattern. Okay? Now, the tightness or the looseness that you hold these cymbals means everything. Okay? You can play the exact same bass drum and snare drum pattern at any specific tempo. Like, let me give you an example. I'm just going to play this pattern. Now, I'm going to add the hi-hat, and I'm going to play the hi-hat 3 or 4 different ways. Okay? Here's beat 1. 2. 3. 4. Could you tell the songs I was playing? The first one is like a modern country song. The second one is just like a modern pop song. The third one was a heavy metal song. And the fourth one was a punk song. The exact same groove. It just changed the vibe completely with how far open I had the hi-hat and how I phrased it. Did you notice that first one I played very straight eights? The second one I played that little kind of the shoulder of the stick and the tip of the stick type thing, create that little quarter note lilt. It's unbelievable what the phrasing on this instrument can do that changes your stylistic appropriateness and your dynamic balance on the set, okay? The other thing I want to talk about is I have students talk about all the time regarding like how they play the hi-hat pattern and snare drum pattern. They're always talking about, I'm going to get my sticks caught together whenever I'm doing this, and however you do your motion, your wind up, and that type thing. You're going to create a certain type of, I call it choreography between the hands, okay? Did you notice when I was playing that when my hands came up on counts 2 and 4 to play the backbeat, they kind of came up in sympathy with one another? That little bit of choreography on counts 2 and 4, that again creates motion and space between the sticks so you don't click them together, right? Again, that's going to happen from time to time. And again, you're going to miss rim shots from time to time. But that's what I teach, okay? All right, the last thing I want to mention, okay? Now, I'm going to paint myself intentionally into a pedagogical corner here. This is the first thing. They always teach academic probity, and they're like, whatever you do when you're teaching, make sure that you don't put anybody up against the wall, okay? All right, so I'm going to put myself up against the wall, okay? If I ever hear any of you play a quarter note bell pattern like this, I'm coming after you and your firstborn, okay? When you play a bell pattern in like a backbeat or rock-oriented situation, that quarter note bell pattern or even an eighth note bell pattern, you need to be using the shoulder of your stick on the bell of the cymbal. And it doesn't have to be right up on the felt. You can get a great bell sound down to where that bell starts curving into the bow of the cymbal. This is the thickest part of the cymbal. You need the thick part of the stick to get the sound. When you're hammering it out between snare and bass drum, listen to the difference between and okay? That was a little side note. All right. Any questions about anything? You guys are either good listeners or bored to death.
No, it's great.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Just talk about why, whenever you're playing rock grooves,
Yeah.
compared to jazz grooves, you are digging the head into the, or you are
Well,
leaving the beater. And
I'm actually not. No, I'm just saying it's a choice on this, right? I let the beater ball release whenever I'm playing here. It's a drummer's choice. Again, if you want to get more of like a drier staccato sound on a dampened bass drum, you can leave that beater ball in the head. Like if anybody who was here last year, if you remember JR when he played, JR is a big guy, right? He's like 6'4", 6'5". He plays with those square wooden beaters that weigh about 2 pounds each when he plays. But he doesn't leave the beater ball on the head. You know what I mean? He gets a massive smack with that.